The Cathiran predator cub had its teeth locked around Amelia's diplomatic sash, and it was purring. Not the theoretical purring that Cathiran biology textbooks described. Not the resonance frequency they'd recorded and categorized and filed into behavioral taxonomy. This was an actual, genuine, bone-deep vibration that made the fabric between its fangs hum like a tuning fork. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. And it was attached to a creature with 3 sets of regenerating teeth and biomechanical claws that should have shredded her arm to organic confetti the moment she made eye contact. Ambassador Vexthul's mandibles locked mid-breath across the diplomatic chamber. "This is impossible," he said, and his voice had the particular quality of a being watching fundamental laws of physics file for divorce. "The behavioral imprinting is absolute. It cannot deviate from designation protocols." Amelia, still holding perfectly still while the cub, no larger than a terrestrial wolf but significantly more teeth-forward in its design philosophy, tugged her sash with genuine enthusiasm. Managed to sound genuinely curious rather than terrified. "Well, it's doing something," she said, nodding down at the cub. "What's your protocol for something?" Security Chief Korvax made a sound like a distressed engine. His hand moved toward a weapons system that existed primarily in theoretical space at this point. He had no actual protocol for targeting a contaminated predator without risking catastrophic diplomatic incident. "Termination," he said. "Immediate." Of what exactly? Amelia kept her eyes on the cub, watching the way it adjusted its grip, learning the sash's texture through direct investigation. "Me or the cub?" "Both, potentially," Vexthul said, and he wasn't joking. "Until causality is determined." The thing nobody was saying out loud, but everyone in the observation gallery was frantically thinking, was that the cub was supposed to be executing a trained attack sequence on the human representative right now. That was the entire point of this diplomatic gesture from the Cathiran government. Look, they were supposed to be demonstrating. Our apex predators are so perfectly engineered, so absolutely devoted to designation protocols, that even in formal diplomatic chambers, they will execute assigned prey elimination with complete predictability. It was supposed to be a show of strength. It was absolutely not supposed to involve the predator cub experiencing what looked disturbingly like joy. The cub pulled harder on the sash, and Amelia, who had spent 7 years teaching 32 kindergarteners at PS 451 on Earth before accepting this posting, did something that made Vexthul's entire neurological system freeze mid-panic. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that meant she understood what was happening. The kind of laugh that suggested this situation was within some parameter of her experience. The cub's purring intensified. "Designation protocol violation," Korvax said, flatly. "The cub has rejected prey identification. Behavioral lock has failed. Contamination vector is playing," Amelia finished. She was still completely motionless, letting the cub investigate, but there was something in her tone that suggested she'd maybe encountered this situation before. Or at least something like it. "Apparently your whole civilization has really complicated feelings about that." Vexthul contacted Central Command mid-chamber. His transmission was priority flagged and absolutely terrified. The cub tugged again. The sash moved. Amelia didn't resist. Instead, she let the fabric slack slightly, giving the cub tension to work against, and watched as the creature's predatory instinct apparently short-circuited into something that looked disturbingly like tactical problem-solving. The cub adjusted its grip, It shifted angles. It was learning the sash. In the observation gallery, Cathiran military analysts were beginning to experience what could only be described as collective existential crisis. Because if the designation protocols could fail on a cub, they could fail on anything. And if they could fail on anything, then the entire Cathiran military infrastructure, which was fundamentally built on the assumption of absolute behavioral predictability, might be operating under false certainties. The cub tugged harder. The purring continued. And Amelia Williams, former elementary school teacher, remained perfectly still, watching a species confront the possibility that learning might be more powerful than engineering. Amelia recognized the behavioral pattern in less than 3 seconds. She'd spent 7 years watching young terrestrial primates discover the world through tactile investigation and play-based learning. She knew what curiosity looked like when it wasn't filtered through ideology or fear. The cub wasn't malfunctioning. It wasn't contaminated. It was doing something far more dangerous from a Cathiran perspective. It was learning. The realization crystallized as the cub's grip on her sash shifted, not searching for a killing angle anymore, but investigating texture, testing tension, exploring the mathematical properties of woven fabric. A predator's instinct, yes, but being applied to play instead of prey elimination. Amelia made her decision in the space between heartbeats. She reached down with her free hand and untied her diplomatic sash, the long, decorative element that Cathiran protocol required all human representatives to wear in formal chambers. It was ceremonial, elaborate, specifically designed to mark her as subject to their social hierarchy, which made it absolutely perfect for what she was about to do. She created a knot configuration in the center, nothing complex, just a simple loop with 2 long ends trailing, and held one end steady while extending the other toward the cub. Vexithul made a sound like a system going into emergency shutdown. "What are you doing?" His mandibles were vibrating, with controlled panic. "This is accelerating the contamination. You're reinforcing the behavioral deviation." Amelia wasn't looking at him. She was watching the cub's eyes track the moving fabric. "I'm playing," she said softly, her tone carrying the particular gentleness she used with anxious children. "It's like, you know what? Never mind. You probably don't have those." The cub lunged for the sash's trailing end and caught it mid-swing. This time, instead of trying to shred through to reach her, it pulled, tugged, applied force with precision, testing the knot's structural integrity. The purring intensified, and Amelia could feel the vibration traveling through the fabric. Korvax's weapon systems activated with a sound like a predator drawing breath. "Stand down from the cub immediately," he ordered, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone reading from a protocol manual while experiencing complete existential breakdown. Protocol 7 Sentinel requires termination of all contaminated apex entities. Compliance is non-negotiable. Amelia pulled back gently on her end of the sash, creating tension. The cub responded instantly, adjusting its grip, learning that resistance meant the game had new parameters. It was problem-solving in real time. "Requires what?" she asked mildly, not looking away from the cub. "I break a toy and everyone here dies? That's not a protocol, Chief. That's a hostage situation with extra steps." Something shifted in Vexthul's neurological processing. She could see it happen, the exact moment when he stopped trying to categorize what was occurring and started understanding what it meant. The cub wasn't being contaminated. It was being educated. Amelia's laugh came naturally, unconsciously, the genuine sound of someone playing a game they'd played 1,000 times before. The cub's purring pitch changed instantly, responding to the vibration frequencies of her voice. Its pulling became more enthusiastic, more coordinated. It had identified a play partner with emotional states it could track and respond to. Vex Thule was mid-transmission to the Cathiran Defense Ministry when he realized behavioral designation systems weren't absolute. They were learned, which meant they could be unlearned, which meant assassination protocols could be deviated from, which meant the entire Cathiran military infrastructure, built on the assumption of absolute, inerasable behavioral predictability, might be constructed on theoretical sand. The cub tugged the sash harder. Amelia laughed again. And across the diplomatic chamber, a civilization began to understand why they'd been exterminating malfunctioning predators for 3,000 years. Because once one started learning, none of them could ever be reliably controlled again. Commander Zara arrived in the diplomatic chamber like a crisis made flesh. She moved with the particular efficiency of someone trained to respond to existential threats, her security detail fanning out behind her in perfect formation. She'd been briefed en route: the behavioral deviation, the contamination vector, the potential security compromise. She understood the parameters of the crisis. What she wasn't prepared for was actually seeing it. The human was playing with a predator cub, not fighting it, not being attacked by it. Playing. The sash was now knotted into something more complex, loops within loops, a tactical puzzle. And the cub was approaching the problem with what could only be described as tactical reasoning. It would pull from one angle, feel the resistance, adjust, try a different vector. Each attempt informed the next. It was learning in real time. "Stand aside from the contaminated specimen, human," Zara commanded, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone reading from a protocol manual they'd memorized decades ago. Her weapon systems were cycling online, calculating trajectory and collateral damage. That creature requires immediate behavioral reset or termination authorization. Amelia didn't look up from the cub. She let it tug the sash, watched it work through another problem-solving sequence. "It's a cub, Commander," she said quietly. "And it's learning, which is apparently something you all are terrified of." Zara's mandibles locked. "Our security depends on absolute behavioral predictability. Designation protocols are non-negotiable foundational elements of—" "Then your security was always fake," Amelia interrupted, still focused on the cub. "You just didn't know it." The silence that followed had weight. Vex Thule was already making the connection that would destroy him professionally. If this cub could learn to deviate, then all Cathiran predators could. Every elite guard, every assault creature, every designation-locked weapon platform. Every single one could be subject to cognitive development. The entire military infrastructure, 3,000 years of doctrine, billions of credits in bioengineered precision, might be constructed on the assumption that learning couldn't happen, when learning was literally the foundational property of every biological mind in existence. The cub suddenly approached Amelia directly, without the sash. It nudged her hand with one of its lower jaws, a gesture of solicitation, play-seeking, independent decision-making. It was choosing her as a play partner. Not because it had been commanded to, not because of behavioral imprinting, but because it had decided. Zara experienced something that might have been genuine vertigo. "What have you done to it?" Her voice had changed, less command authority, more existential horror. "Treated it like it had a brain," Amelia said, creating a new knot configuration with the sash. Apparently, that was radical. Korvax moved forward, his weapons cycling back online. We can repair this. We can reset the behavioral imprinting, run full neurological resequencing protocols, restore the designation locks. You mean you can traumatize it back into obedience? Amelia said flatly. Yeah, that was always going to be your solution, wasn't it? Zara approached slowly. She wasn't trying to threaten. She was trying to process. Her neurological architecture was cracking along the same fault lines that had just broken Vexthul. This is a containment failure of catastrophic proportions, she said. If this knowledge reaches the general population, if military confidence collapses, if the peace treaty destabilizes. This is called childhood, Amelia interrupted. And there was something in her tone that made Zara go very still. You're all acting like you've never seen someone grow. Like development is a security breach instead of a biological inevitability. The Cathiran science teams that had been hastily assembled were measuring the cub's behavioral changes in real time. They were finding acceleration curves that shouldn't exist, according to Cathiran behavioral theory. The cub was teaching itself, using play as an educational framework, which was exactly how human children developed. A junior researcher, probably too new to fully understand the implications, asked a question that would echo through Cathiran civilization for centuries. What if they've all been learning? What if our enforcement designation protocols have just been creating learned compliance, not inherent behavioral locks? The silence that followed was the sound of a species confronting the possibility that they'd been fundamentally wrong about everything. Zara realized she faced an impossible choice. She couldn't terminate the cub without admitting that the entire Cathiran military hierarchy was built on biological impossibilities. She couldn't let this continue without accepting the cub as alive, not as a weapon system, but as a being with capacity for growth. The contradiction was absolute. She approached Amelia carefully, moving past the cub with deliberate, non-threat posturing. Why did you do this? Zara asked. And the question carried the weight of a civilization's self-deception finally surfacing. Amelia looked up, still holding the sash, still watching the cub investigate the knots. Because it was there, and it was curious, and I had a sash, she said simply. Most of my decisions are that simple. You've destabilized everything we've built, Zara said. Amelia met her eyes. I've destabilized a lie. Your civilization built the actual thing just fine without my help. I just made the lie impossible to ignore. The cub pulled the sash harder, and Zara watched it problem solve and understood that her entire species had been living inside a carefully maintained myth. And that myth had just died in a diplomatic chamber, pulled down by a predator cub and a human with a piece of fabric. The Cathiran government made its decision in emergency session, and the decision was unprecedented. No termination, no behavioral reset, no neurological resequencing to restore the fictional designation protocols that had never actually existed in the first place. Instead, observation. The cub would be studied as a sapient entity, not a weapon system, not a contaminated specimen requiring remediation, not a security threat requiring immediate elimination. A sapient entity, which meant new legal categories had to be invented, new ethical frameworks, new everything. The Cathiran legal code, 3,000 years of accumulated doctrine, had exactly 0 provisions for learning predator that chooses not to attack when designated as prey. They were going to have to build that from scratch. Zara established a research protocol within the hour. The cub would remain in diplomatic observation, with Amelia as the primary behavioral consultant, which was technically brilliant bureaucratic maneuvering because it meant the human stayed contained and observable too. Two problems solved with one protocol. Very efficient. Very Catherine. Amelia stepped back from the cub with the same casual efficiency she'd displayed throughout the entire cosmic civilization-altering crisis. She tied her sash back on, properly this time, restored to its ceremonial configuration, and checked the time on her diplomatic display. "I have a briefing in 10 minutes, she said conversationally. "Cathiran agricultural exports. Apparently, you folks have developed a new grain synthesis that doesn't require 3 separate ecosystems to support it." Pretty impressive, actually. Vex Thule stared at her with the particular expression of an alien encountering a being from an incomprehensibly different reality. "Do you understand what you've accomplished?" His mandibles were still trembling slightly. Stress response, not aggression. "You've fundamentally destabilized." "I played with a kid," Amelia said simply. "You're the ones inventing military organizational chaos from it. That's on you guys." The cub tried to follow her as she moved toward the briefing room door. Its purring shifted to a higher frequency. Anxiety, displacement, the sound of a learning being suddenly separated from its play partner. Zara's team moved in gently, offering new enrichment structures, new tactile opportunities, trying to convince the cub that there were other interesting things in existence besides Amelia's diplomatic sash. The cub was not convinced. Korvax approached Amelia at the threshold, his security protocols cycling down to non-threat status. "What if this is how humans always operate?" His voice carried genuine fear. "What if this casual destabilization of entire societal structures, what if this is intentional?" Amelia actually laughed, not mocking, genuine amusement. "Wow," she said, "and here I thought I was just being nice." The cub made one final attempt to reach her, its claws scraping against the chamber floor with sounds like desperate mathematics. Amelia turned back, gave it a casual wave, the kind of gesture a human adult makes to a child who's being picked up by someone else for the day. Temporary separation, not final. She kept her voice soft and steady. "Stay with them," she said to the cub. "Help them understand what you are." Then she walked through the doorway toward her briefing about agricultural exports, leaving behind a predator species that had just discovered their entire civilization was built on denying biological reality. The Cathiran government had to accept that their entire ideological framework was flawed. All predators might be sapient, learning beings. This didn't just change military protocol, it changed everything. 3,000 years of doctrine. Suddenly optional, suddenly suspect, suddenly requiring complete reconsideration. The cub settled into Zara's research chamber, watching the doorway where Amelia had disappeared, purring softly at frequencies that Cathiran science would spend years trying to categorize. In the briefing room, Amelia opened her documents on Cathiran grain synthesis and wondered why aliens always seemed surprised that learning was possible. Behind her, an entire civilization was reorganizing itself around a truth they should have known all along. All because she'd had a sash and recognized curiosity when she saw it. Within 6 hours, Cathiran media was processing the concept of learning predators, like a civilization trying to rebuild its foundational software while still powered on. The military generals were in emergency session, not discussing how to respond to the crisis, but how to reorganize around the fact that the crisis was actually just how reality worked. Scientists were developing new frameworks for sapient behavioral flexibility at speeds that would have seemed impossible yesterday. The concept of designation protocol, that cornerstone of 3,000 years of Cathiran doctrine, was becoming philosophically suspect in academic circles. In military circles, in government circles, everywhere, really. Zara appointed Amelia as primary consultant to the research program within hours, partially because it made bureaucratic sense, partially because she wanted to understand how a human could be so calmly certain about something that was destroying Cathiran civilization. The cub, designated as subject Cathira Prime Learning Exemplar in the official documentation, but everyone called it Curious, became a cultural ambassador almost by accident. It participated in observation sessions, and Cathiran children began requesting interaction with human cultural concepts. The idea that learning was natural, expected, even desirable, began spreading through Cathiran society, like a carefully contained biological agent finally released into an unprepared population. Amelia was in a break room 3 days later, reviewing updated agricultural data with Zara, when the observation summary came through on the research display. Curious had learned to manipulate 7 different enrichment structures. It had demonstrated problem-solving with tool use, patterns. It had made independent decisions about social hierarchy within the research team. "You know," Amelia said conversationally, pulling up her lunch container, "back home, we basically just throw kids at problems and see what sticks. Apparently it works better than your whole certainty-based approach." Zara processed that statement like it was written in a language she was still learning. "This is not how I imagined diplomatic relations working," Zara said finally. Amelia shrugged, eating something that Cathiran biology found completely incomprehensible. Most of the best things aren't planned. They just happen when someone stops overthinking. The Cathiran government, processing at speeds that bureaucracies should not technically be capable of, officially acknowledged something that would have been heresy a week ago. Human behavioral flexibility wasn't a security risk. It was a feature they needed to understand. Documentaries were being produced. Cathiran scholars were examining the moment when an entire species learned that learning was possible. They traced it back to a human who tied a sash into a game, who recognized curiosity instead of threat, who treated a predator cub like it was capable of development, because it was. Amelia's next assignment briefing included a note flagged by the Diplomatic Council. Recommend human liaison specialists in all sectors. Human understanding of sapient behavioral flexibility may constitute strategic advantage in post-designation Cathiran society. Humans understood something the Cathiras had theoretically known but never implemented. Beings were more than their programming. Curiosity was valid. Play wasn't security risk. It was education. It was how learning happened. Play might be the most important protocol of all. The predator cub, Curious, became the symbol of a species learning to think differently. It was painted on public murals. Its learning milestones were broadcast on government channels. Schools used its development as a teaching tool for a generation of Cathirans, learning that deviation from protocol didn't mean malfunction. It meant growth. And it had all started because one human treated a learning being like it was capable of learning. Because Amelia Williams had recognized a cub's curiosity as something worth nurturing instead of something to be eliminated. In the research chamber, Curious pulled at enrichment structures with purpose and intention, making choices, learning constantly, and purring in frequencies that Cathiran science had finally named. The sound of a mind becoming itself.